Hey everyone. In today's video, you'll meet Matthew Granger, a Chicago broker who died for 12 minutes and came back with a chilling revelation. Heaven is not a resting place. It's a spiritual labor camp. What he saw on the other side will shake everything you believe about the afterlife. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. And comment below which city you are watching so we can get to know each other better. I remember exactly the moment everything stopped. It was an ordinary Tuesday, cloudy skies over Chicago, and I was having another chaotic day at the brokerage firm where I worked. The pressure was absurd. The screens flickered, the phones rang, and inside me something screamed that this was about to end. But not in a symbolic way. It was literal. In the middle of a meeting, I felt my heart fail. First, as a stumble, then, like a breakdown. It was a tightness in my chest that knocked me down in front of everyone. I remember seeing people around me scream, running in slow motion. As the physical world seemed to shake, something in me began to slow down. I didn't feel pain, just a silence that expanded, as if it swallowed time. The sound of my name being called became more and more distant, and then everything went dark. For a moment I thought I was fainting, but what happened next doesn't resemble anything I can explain logically. I saw my body on the floor. I saw the meeting room from above, as if I were a camera floating on the ceiling. I saw my colleagues trying to revive my body, doctors arriving, defibrillator, and at the same time I didn't feel like I was there. It was like I was watching a movie of my own life, but without any emotional connection. I just watched. At that moment, I realized something terrifying. I had died. It was a cold observation, without panic. I knew with supernatural clarity. My heart stopped for 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would transform everything I believed, or didn't believe, about what comes after life. I felt a force pulling me up. It wasn't wind, it wasn't gravity. It was as if my consciousness was being sucked into another frequency. And that's when things started to get unbelievable. The dark around me began to dissolve like paint being diluted with water. First came the light. But it was no ordinary light. It pulsed as if it had a life of its own. This light he sang somehow. It was as if silent music filled everything, and that music was familiar. I didn't see a tunnel. I didn't see angels. What I saw was a space that seemed infinite, made of pure vibration. And in the midst of all this, I realized something that left me completely shaken. I was still me, but without body, without voice, without linear thought. I was pure consciousness. And then came the question that would change everything. Why do you think death means rest? That question echoed inside me, coming from all directions at once. But there was no one there. Just the question and the vibration that seemed to smile. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't going to rest. I was being summoned. The sensation was of being swallowed by a colossal magnetic field, but there was no fear. On the contrary, there was a strange peace, mixed with an indescribable tension, as if something great was about to happen. The question that echoed, "Why do you think death means rest?" continued to resonate inside me, like a code that I needed to decipher. It was then that the light began to transform. Before me, a new scenery appeared, as if it had been designed out of thin air. It was an extensive valley, surrounded by golden mountains that pulsed light from the inside out. The sky had no sun or clouds, but it radiated a bright, almost liquid light. The colors were impossible to describe with our language. Blues that vibrated, greens that seemed to have a soul, and the air seemed conscious. I breathed and felt that the environment itself recognized me. In this place, time was running out. It happened. Everything was simultaneous and yet ordered. It was there that I realized I was on some kind of higher plane. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination. It was more real than any moment in my entire life. And then they appeared. Beings, entities, call it whatever you want. They had no defined shape, but I recognized them, as if each one carried a forgotten part of me. One of them approached without physically moving, and his presence was overwhelming. It was made of light, but a light intelligent. When he spoke, he didn't use words. He communicated with impressions, emotions, certainties that welled up inside me like memories that were always there. "Do you still think this is the end?" And he said without sound. "No," I replied inside myself. "But then, what is this?" The answer was a shock. "This is work." I didn't understand. Work? After death? Wasn't this where souls rested? Where would we finally be rewarded? But he showed me something. A vision opened before me. Millions, perhaps billions, of consciousnesses, each in its own process, creating, studying, healing, helping others. It was like a huge spiritual university. Nothing was standing still. Nothing was just being enjoyed. What they told me next defied everything I had ever heard about heaven. Here no one comes to relax. Here we build. Here we expand. Here what was dirty is cleaned, and what was pure is strengthened. And then he added, with a clarity that cut me to the core, "What you called heaven, Matthew, is actually the beginning of your true journey." I didn't know what to feel. A mixture of wonder and shame overwhelmed me. I had spent my entire life chasing comfort, pleasure, and material achievements. And now he discovered that the true purpose of existence had only just begun. After death. It was at that moment that the landscape around me began to shape itself, as if responding to my inner state. Trees rose, rivers appeared, and buildings of light took shape before me. It was as if the entire place was vivo and shaped by the vibrations of my soul. And then came another question, this time as a direct whisper to my spirit. "Are you ready to start?" I didn't answer the question, not because I didn't want to, but because at that moment I understood that on that level, wanting was irrelevant. The soul responds with what it is, not with what she says. And from what I felt, the answer had already been given, inside, in the place where you don't lie. The city before me completely materialized. It was not made of concrete or stone, but of living forms of light and sound. The buildings seemed to emit silent melodies, as if each building was a note in a symphony that vibrated through the air itself. The streets were not made for feet, but for thought. Yes, I moved with the thought. And more than that, every time I wanted to be somewhere, the space around me reconfigured itself to take me there. All around me were other consciousnesses, some in human form, others indefinable, like essences floating with intentions. And even without words, everything was communication. They knew who I was, but not as Matthew Granger, 43, stockbroker. They knew me in essence, like a spiritual being who had long forgotten his origin. As I walked, or rather thought my way, one of the beings approached me. He seemed more defined, almost human, with an appearance that changed depending on my focus. Now an old man, now a young man, now something beyond form. He didn't introduce himself with a name, but I recognized him by feeling. He was my guide. "You have always sought purpose, Matthew," he said, his voice coming straight to my mind. "But I looked in the wrong places. Here you will remember." "Remember what?" I asked. "Who you were, before you forgot." He took me to a kind of elevated square in the center of the living city. In the middle of it, there was a large crystal suspended in the air, slowly rotating. But it wasn't an object, it was a memory portal. As I approached, it glowed deep blue, and then I saw my own soul in previous stages, passing through other lives. I saw decisions, falls, learning. I saw how much I had asked to forget all this before I was born. I saw the contract of my existence. There, I understood. Nothing was random. Not even the pain, nor success. Not even the crisis that killed me for 12 minutes. Everything was part of a larger cycle, an infinite class, and that city, that dimension, it was the school where souls awakened to themselves. It was not a static paradise. It was an expanding city of consciousness, and each being there had a function. Some taught, others healed newly arrived souls. Some created thought forms to reincarnate more prepared. Others studied vibrations, colors, sounds. It was as if existence there itself was a sacred office. I then asked the guide, "But what about God? Where is he here?" His response went through me. "You are breathing God now. He is the vibration that holds all this together. Here, you don't see God with your eyes, you feel it with your entire being." I was speechless, because at that moment I realized that I was already feeling this presence. She didn't come from outside. She vibrated in me. On Earth, I always imagined heaven as a kind of prize, the grand finale, the trophy after a life well lived. Most people think this way, even if unconsciously. The idea that after all the suffering, sweat, and losses there would be an eternal resort to rest in peace was almost a universal consolation. But there, in that dimension of living consciousness, this idea seemed like a childish joke. My guide took me to a room, if I can call it that. It was an open, translucent space with walls made of malleable light. In the center, a sphere floated. As I touched my consciousness to her, a new vision exploded within me. I saw thousands of souls newly arrived on the other side. Some cried with regret. Others were disoriented. Some hid from the light, embarrassed. Very few were actually ready for work. And it was then that I heard my guide's voice again. True heaven is not for those who expect rest. It is for those who are ready to evolve. That place was more like a multi-dimensional spiritual school than with anything my human mind would have been able to imagine. I saw souls studying, others guiding incarnations still on Earth, some helping lower planes, like volunteers, on an energetic battlefield. I was not an exception. I discovered that before I was born I had accepted, even begged for difficult opportunities. Not to suffer for nothing, but to accelerate my spiritual evolution. And then, a memory hit me hard. The panic attack that led to my cardiac arrest was in fact a pre-agreed exit, a contracted break to remind me of what I had forgotten. I wasn't being punished. I was being called. In the midst of that learning, I saw a group of souls coming together. They all exuded a more intense vibe, as if they were about to do something important. I asked the guide what that was. "These are the souls who have already understood the mission. They are returning." "Coming back? Why?" He replied with a firmness that made me shudder. "Because heaven needs to be brought to earth, and that can only be done by those who have already lived it." It was like being punched existentially. All my life I've been trying to get somewhere, climb the career ladder, buy the right house, be recognized. And now I understood that heaven, it is not a place you go to. It is a place you come from, and to which you must become worthy of returning. The guide approached me once again and told me something that still resonates with me to this day. Heaven is not a destination. It is a frequency, and only those who vibrate in it can access it. It was at that moment that everything stopped around me. Time, if it existed there, froze. The light fell silent, and inside me, something began to align, like gears waking up after eons of slumber. The time had come to make a choice, and what I would see next would completely change my decision. The city of light slowly disappeared like smoke being sucked into me. Everything around went dark, but it wasn't dark. With fear, it was like a cosmic womb, silent, deep. I was in another space, floating in total suspension. And then she came up, the room of choices. It was not a room in the physical sense, but a space where the soul confronts its own essence. All around me, images began to form, projections of my entire life. Every choice, every mistake, every selfish thought, every act of kindness. It was as if I was watching all the whys of my existence. But what shocked me most was that I didn't view these moments with judgment, but with an expanded understanding. I saw the boy I was, lacking affection. I saw the man I had become, obsessed with control. I saw how my insecurities pushed me toward excessive ambition, not out of malice, but out of fear. And I saw how, even so, God never left me. In the midst of this whirlwind of images, a figure made of pure golden vibration appeared. It had no form, but I knew exactly what it was. My higher self, the purest part of me, the one that never forgot who I really am. This presence said to me, without words, "You have 3 choices, Matthew. You can stay here and continue evolving. You can go back and resume your mission, or you can start all over again with a new life, a new story, a new chance." The idea of starting over from scratch without memory was tempting. It was like erasing everything and trying to get it right from the beginning. Staying there also seemed comfortable, but there was something in me that wouldn't let me calm down, an uneasiness that grew more and more. I remembered what the guide had said before. Heaven needs to be brought to earth, and this can only be done by those who have already lived it. At that moment, I understood the weight of purpose. My mission wasn't just to remember, it was to share. Everything I had seen, felt, experienced, and couldn't die with me. And then the room dissolved, and another image was shown to me. I saw my wife crying at my bedside. I saw my 8-year-old daughter drawing hearts with my name inside, not understanding what was happening. I saw my elderly mother praying with a faith I never shared. And more than anything, I saw people I didn't know yet, but who needed to hear what I was about to experience. That's when everything inside me aligned like a soul-centered explosion of light. I couldn't escape it. It shouldn't have. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was ready to serve, not to a boss, a system, or a hungry ego, but to the truth that vibrates at the center of the universe. I took a deep breath. If you can breathe on that plane, and inside me a single word formed. Try. And it was that yes that activated the last part of the journey. The most difficult, the most revealing. The return. Saying yes felt like the end of the journey. But actually, it was the beginning of the most brutal part. I had chosen to return to the body, to the meat, to the limit. But no one told me that being reborn hurts more than dying. The light that surrounded me began to vibrate at another frequency. The comfortable warmth of the upper plane was being replaced by a feeling of density, as if I were being sucked through a funnel too narrow for my soul. It was like trying to push infinity into a matchbox. I felt intense pressure. My thoughts began to fragment. The colors dissolved. The living city disappeared. The sky that once throbbed with music was now silent. And along with that, the memory of what I was began to slip through the fingers of my consciousness. It was as if I was losing everything that made me whole. And then, the weight came. Body weight. The sound of machines. A constant beep. The physical pain. A tube in my throat. Hands holding me. Doctors. Screams. Artificial lights. And an existential void so deep that it made me want to scream in despair. But I couldn't. I was back. It was alive. But not whole. For days I was hospitalized. The diagnosis was sudden cardiac arrest, caused by extreme stress. The doctors called me a miracle. They said it was statistically impossible for me to return without any consequences. But I knew. It wasn't luck. It was a mission. But no one, absolutely no one, knew what I had seen. And the cruelest thing of all was realizing that, little by little, the sensations of that other plane began to disappear from my memory, as if they were protected behind a curtain of fog. The clarity I had felt there began to fade, and a horrible panic hit me. What if I forget everything? I thought. But then, at night, in silence, a vibration still whispered deep in my chest, weak but present, and with it came the message that saved my soul. You don't need to remember with your mind, just live with the truth. This phrase reconnected me. I knew I had to do something, to write, to speak, testify, transform that experience into a life mission. But there was a problem. I was an ordinary man, a broker, an atheist converted by pain. How to explain all this to the world without sounding crazy? It was then that the synchronicities began. Lucid dreams. People who appeared out of nowhere with accurate messages. Books that fell from the shelf with the right pages open. And, strangest of all, my electronics started to show interference every time I thought intensely about that place. Lights flickered, sounds cut, and sometimes I felt that vibration again. It was heaven reminding me, you're back, but you're still logged in. And the real mission was just beginning. The days following my return were anything but normal. Yes, my body was alive. The doctor said I was lucky, but the truth? I felt like an outsider within myself. The Matthew who returned was not the same Matthew who fell dead in the meeting room. My wife noticed it first. It said that my look had changed, that there was a different silence in me, not of sadness, but of someone who is listening to something that others can't hear. I tried to adapt to the routine, eating, walking, sleeping, but everything looked faded. Life on Earth compared to that celestial vibration was like living submerged in murky water. And yet I knew, this is where I should be. Why, I still had no idea, but something in me left no doubt, and that's when the signs started. Everything was subtle but impossible to ignore. Always at 3:33 a.m., I would wake up for no reason, with my chest vibrating as if it were being pulled out of my body. I felt an energy in the room even though I was alone. A strange heat as if someone was there, standing, waiting. There was no fear, just a silent invitation. One of those early mornings, tired of fighting it, I got up and sat on the living room floor. I closed my eyes, and then it happened. I heard that same voice, soft, firm, without sound, that had guided me from the other side. You need to remember what you saw. But I'm forgetting, I replied in thought. Then paint with words. Write the sky in the language of men. This order hit me hard. I, who was never spiritualized. Me, who scoffed at anything that couldn't be proven with spreadsheets. Now he was being instructed directly from beyond to write about the sky. But how? How to translate the indescribable. That's when I understood. It wasn't to convince anyone. It was to remind sleeping souls of what they already knew, but had forgotten. I started writing. At first, timidly, just loose, sentences in an old notebook. But every time I touched that memory with words, the vibration came back stronger, as if language were a bridge to reconnect heaven to earth. One night, after writing for hours, my daughter entered the room without making a sound. She looked at me with those sleepy eyes and said, "Daddy, why are you writing about where we go when we die?" I stopped. I had never said anything like that to her. Nothing. "How do you know that, dear?" I asked, trying to hide my astonishment. "Because I dreamed of you there, and there was light everywhere, and you were different, lighter but happy." At that moment I understood. Heaven was using every means possible to remind me of the mission, even my daughter. And a certainty invaded me like lightning. If even a child can feel this, then the world needs to know. It was at this point that something inside me definitively awakened, as if the sky, which before was just a memory vibrating in the distance, began to act through me. And the most surprising thing, what I thought was just mystical, It started to make sense even to my logical mind. I started devouring everything I could find about quantum physics, vibration, energy fields, near-death experiences. The skeptic that I had been, one who laughed at any idea outside of reason, now saw clear connections between spirituality and science. And the more I read, the more it matched what I had experienced. The sky. It is not a place. It's a frequency, a vibration so high that it can only be accessed when the soul is in tune with it. And that explains so much. He explains why not all souls make it there after death. This explains why so many people feel disconnected in life. We are vibrating wrong. I went after neuroscientists, spiritualists, physicists, and what I discovered left me in shock. There are actual studies of NDEers reporting experiences similar to mine. Living lights, communication without words, a sense of mission, an encounter with higher consciousnesses, and the certainty that God is something that it is not seen. All of this began to form a new belief within me, not religious but conscious. Spiritual evolution is a technology, and the sky is its most advanced software. Little by little, I gathered the courage to speak publicly. I created a blog, then a channel. I told part of my story, afraid of judgment. But what happened was the opposite. Thousands of people began to identify themselves. People from all over the world wrote to me saying, "I also saw the light. I also came back different. I also felt that I was being called." And that's when I understood something fundamental. Heaven is not a place we go after death. He is trying to manifest himself here now through us. Every lofty thought, every gesture of compassion, every choice that is born from love and not fear, is a portal being opened between the worlds. And the craziest? I started to feel the vibration again, during recordings, in deep conversations, in the silence of the morning. It wasn't constant, but it was unmistakable. That soft pulse, that memory that whispers inside the soul, "You're still connected." I started to notice that some people around me also changed just by being around. They cried without knowing why. They felt goosebumps. They said they had dreams about me, even though they had never met me before. I didn't fully understand, but I knew. It wasn't about me. It was about the frequency that I had carried with me since that day. And now, more than ever, I felt I couldn't stop. Just when I thought I had understood everything, the unexpected happened. No, I was not pulled back into that plane of light, but in a dream, which was more real than waking itself, I was taken to a place that looked nothing like heaven. It was as if someone wanted to show me the other side of the coin. I woke up in the middle of the night, at the infamous 3:33, as always. But this time something was different. The energy in the room was heavy, dense. The air seemed still. I closed my eyes out of instinct and was immediately thrown into a space that felt like a vacuum. There was no color. There was no sound. Just one cold that was not physical but spiritual. And then I felt the presences. They were around. Souls. Lots of. But not like the ones I saw in the City of Light. Those were broken. They were like shadows of themselves. Some seemed stuck, in ideas, memories, traumas. Others just moaned in silence. The most terrifying, some of me recognized. "Matthew, you're back. Do you remember us?" I felt a chill in my soul. These entities surrounded me, begging, crying, accusing. They said they also saw the light but refused to follow it, who were trapped in that state, not by punishment but by unconscious choice. By vibrating so low for so long that they could no longer feel the light even when it was there. It was at that moment that a greater presence appeared. It was not a creature. It was a gigantic consciousness which imposed itself on everything. She didn't speak. She just made me feel a brutal weight about who I was, about the times I judged, when I denied love, when I closed myself off from what was true. It was the most honest reflection of my shadow. It wasn't the devil, was my unintegrated part. And there, in that cold place of the soul, a very ancient voice whispered, "Up until now, God vibrates. But not everyone wants to listen." It was like a hit of light in the dark, and I understood. Even the darkest places beyond have a seed of redemption. But not everyone wants to be saved. This revelation destroyed me. I cried like never before, right there. The pain of these souls was unbearable. Their repentance was a silent cry, and it was there that I received the complete mission. You will come back to tell them about heaven, but also about what happens to those who reject it. They need to know. They need to remember, before it's too late. I woke up drenched in sweat, shaking, but with brutal clarity. Heaven is real, but so is hell. Not like a place of flames, but how an echo of everything we refuse to be. And the worst hell of all is the one where you still have human desires, but you no longer have a body to satisfy them. From that day on, I understood that my mission was not just to inspire, it was also alert. After that night, after seeing the forgotten side of the beyond, the one where the light still whispers but few hear it, I was never the same. Something inside me that was still tied to the material world broke once and for all. It was like I finally understood. Why did I come back? It wasn't to rebuild my career, not even to seek recognition, not even to live better. I came back to fulfill a role, and this role, this calling, it's reminding people that the afterlife is real. And more than that the way we live each thought, each choice, each intention, shapes what we will find on the other side. The message that resonates with me every day now is simple but powerful. You are already building the heaven or hell you will live in. Do you understand the weight of this? It's not a metaphor, it's not philosophy, it's literal. And if there's something that despairs me and moves me at the same time, it's knowing that most people still live as if none of this were true, as if there was infinite time, as if after was a myth, as if heaven were an eternal theme park reserved just because God is good. But it's not like that. Heaven is not given. It is conquered by vibration, by intention, by conscience. And when you die, you don't change into something new. If you reveals, what you really were inside becomes your universe. Therefore, today my mission is to speak, to write, testify, even if they doubt it, even if they mock, even if they call me crazy, why I've been there. I saw the sky that pulses like a symphony of expanding souls. I felt God's presence as an infinite vibration, breathing into everything. And I also saw the void, the cold, dark abyss where souls forget who they are. And so today I tell you with all my being, don't wait for death to change your frequency. Start now. Because when your heart stops, and it will stop, there will be no more masks, not status, no excuses. There will only be the reflection of who you are. And in that moment, either you will become part of the light, or you will be lost in the echo of what you refuse to be. I came back to ensure that you who listen to me now, you don't have to find out this the hard way. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.